These days, farming sims are really popular, and it's not that odd for them to also include some action RPG elements. In fact, just last month during Summer Game Fest, I saw at least 2 new games that mixed action and farm sim, plus yet another during June's Nintendo Direct. Not to mention that the big one, Stardew Valley, has caves with monsters to fight. But 18 years ago in 2006, it was mostly just Story of Seasons, then still Harvest Moon, kind of just being the entire farming sim genre. There might have been more imitators, but I sure as hell don't remember them, and they didn't make too many radically different takes on the genre either. It wasn't really until the series started to decline, probably not helped by the legal stuff that caused the split into Story of Seasons, and the breakout success of Stardew Valley, that these things started to change. But there was another. The first game to fuse farm sim and action RPG, probably. Rune Factory, a fantasy Harvest Moon. On top of Rune Factory 1 being the first game like this that I know of, the trilogy of Rune Factory 1, 2, and 3 on the DS were a huge part of my childhood. In fact, I was originally planning to make this video a retrospective on the entire trilogy of DS titles, but, well, that'd take a lot longer, and also I decided I wanted to do a really deep dive on each title and cover all of the little eccentricities and do it all in a week-by-week playthrough as a way to frame this. Because it is the little eccentricities that really set these games apart from one another. So yeah, with this format in mind, 1 game a video is plenty. Maybe once I've done all 3 though, I'll do a mega compilation video to cover all of them. But for now, let's start focusing on Rune Factory 1. To first give a bit of background, as mentioned, these are older games by now. More mid-2000s goodness. To give you an idea of what other action RPGs were around at the time, the first game released in 2006 in Japan, 2007 in North America, which means that in Japan it shares a year with Monster Hunter DOS and Phantasy Star Universe, while in North America it shares a year with Monster Hunter Freedom 2 and Phantasy Star Universe's Ambition of the Illuminous expansion. So that maybe gives you an idea of what other games in the genre people were playing at the time, and in turn sort of a loose idea of what you can expect. These sorts of games were out of their initial phase and becoming more developed, but they still hadn't yet streamlined the RPG out of the action RPG, and there was still plenty of creativity to be found, even if the gameplay could still tend to be a little bit on the simpler side. But enough talk. Let's go right into the retrospective playthrough properly, starting with week 1 of spring. We play as Raguna, an amnesiac young man who you can rename if you like, but I will just call him Raguna. When the game starts, he passes out on the edge of the village of Cardia, where he's rescued by a young woman named Mist, who decides to just give him a farm. Man, when I pass out on the edge of an unfamiliar town with no memories, I'm a vagrant and breaking the law. When he does it, he becomes a homeowner for free. Then after that, he beats up a monster with farming tools, which is also the only time in the entire game a hostile creature will appear outside a dungeon. It's kind of weird that this happens, but only once. Okay, also I already need to digress. So here you're told that weapons, and I guess also farming tools that people might reasonably or unreasonably use as weapons, are all enchanted with some magic that causes them to not kill monsters, just return them to the other world they were summoned from. Even as a preteen, I thought this was some nonsense to let the game pretend it's less violent than it actually is, but now as an adult, I think it's both better and worse than I thought back then. Better in that, yeah, given the circumstances of these creatures, some of which show clear signs of human-like intelligence, slaughtering them just for being yanked from their world into yours would be kind of a shitty thing to do. new. But also worse in that this is one of the only ways in which the game acknowledges any sort of nuance with the situation of the monsters. Taming them and keeping them forever in a barn? Yeah, that's fine, even with the aforementioned intelligent monsters. The game does not differentiate between intelligent monsters and ones that are effectively just wild animals. To be clear, I'm not saying we can't have an old-fashioned adventure where we don't sweat the nuances and just kill monsters without thinking of them as anything more, but because the game thought a little about it, but not a lot, it draws your attention to the issues in its half-hearted attempts to address them. Well, whatever, I forgot about it a few hours in anyway, and it isn't really important beyond it allows Raguna to remain technically a pacifist. But anyway, with the monster downed, Mist gives you some seeds and lets you loose. I plant the seeds and then, after I water them, I have nothing else to do for the rest of the day. Because it's a holiday, Rune Factory uses a 6-day week with a single combined weekend day just called holiday. Most places are closed, and so I can only meet a handful of people. I do find an empty bottle I steal from Mist. This operates on Zelda rules, so these are rare and essential items. And I also get a fishing rod at the pier and spend the rest of day one fishing. Though I'm a little late shipping these, and so I won't get the money for another day. Since during this I rank up my fishing skill, I'll explain the skills here. In addition to character level, you have 11 different skill ranks, broadly split into a few different categories, all of which level up with use. Active skills like swordsmanship and farming determine the rune point or hit point cost of every use of the respective equipment. They don't, as far as I know, provide any increase in effectiveness. Meanwhile, crafting skills like forging and cooking determine the success rate of their related activities. Every recipe has a level, and the closer your skill rank is to that level, the higher your success rate. Matching the level or exceeding it means you'll always succeed, though I believe that only cooking actually destroys the materials on a failure, so you can basically brute force any other crafting skill so long as you're high enough level to get at least a 1% chance. It's actually a good way to grind up the skill. The communication skill determines the rate at which you can raise the affection of tamed monsters, so monsters tamed later will get to max affection much quicker than your first few. And lastly, your camping skill level is the number of times you can use a sleeping bag during a trip to a dungeon. This will probably never exceed 2 because it takes like 1 use to get to level 2 but like 4 to get to level 3, and frankly you do not need it to go higher than 1. Long-term dungeon diving just isn't something that you really do in this game. Day 2, I am able to actually spend meeting people, which includes getting to talk to Mist when she visits my farm, and getting her to give me an extra batch of free seeds. I don't get too much done until the shipping goes out at 5 p.m, at which point my fishing pays off, and I get a little over 2,000 G. Maybe if I'd shipped stuff a little earlier the day before I could have gotten a fridge, but regardless I immediately run to the general store and the blacksmith before they close, buying 3 packs of strawberry seeds and a sword respectively. And then I spend the evening planting and watering those strawberry seeds and doing a little more fishing. Also, I'm going to note here that while there is a decently sized overworld map on the top screen, most of it kind of goes to waste. Unlike some other Harvest Moon titles, all the NPCs are concentrated in the town area. There's like 2 characters that are routinely found outside of the dedicated town section of the map. So while I remember in contemporary Harvest Moon titles that part of the time management came from going around the map to get where you need to go, that's not really an issue here. All the most important stuff is a very short walk from your house. On day 3, I do some more wandering around town, and I find out that the mayor arbitrarily wants me to till 100 squares of my farm to get the pass to the first cave. So that's some busy work, I guess. It's not like I really have the time or equipment to farm that many squares just yet, so they're just going to lay empty for the time being. I also go to the mansion to talk to the rich people there, and Bianca is so angry about my house being an eyesore that she gives me an axe to chop wood with so that I can make it better. thanks, I think. After going and spending a lot of time hoeing my field, I get the pass, along with a sickle from the daughter of the general store owner. After my 5 o'clock fishing funds come in, I buy and plant 2 more strawberry seed bags and go into the caves for the first time. We get a little conversation with Mist, and she gives us an escape spell, a free spell that teleports us out of any cave instantly, which makes it the most useful spell in the game. So now that we've dived into the dungeons, let's get a little more into mechanics. First off, instead of a Harvest Moon stamina bar, you have hit points and rune points, which are kind of both your stamina. Whenever you do something, first your rune points are consumed, but if those are empty, you lose hit points instead. Getting attacked by monsters causes you to lose hit points directly, and there's magic that can only be cast from rune points. Once we get some real magic and not just escape, I'll talk more about the mechanics with that. If you run out of hit points in the overworld, you'll pass out and wake up at the clinic, losing the rest of the day and a bit of the next morning like a typical Harvest Moon game. But if you run out in a dungeon, it's game over, load your last save. So be sure to save before dungeon crawling. Fortunately, there are also save points in the dungeons themselves. Combat with a weapon, meanwhile, is dead simple. You move, you attack, and you can charge an attack for a special move. You can only dodge by sprinting to reposition, so movement is important. Your combo attack is pretty basic. Each weapon type that can combo just has 2 animations that loop back and forth into each other, and the number of attacks you can combo together without a delay is determined by the specific weapon you're using within a class. And lastly, you can charge your weapon with some individual weapons being able to charge up to a higher level for more damage, performing a special attack that varies with weapon class, which I will get into later when I have more than just a one-handed sword. Lastly, monsters don't have, preset spawns. Instead, there are these monster spawning machines that constantly spit out new monsters until they're destroyed. Well, okay, each one has a cap of monsters it can have spawned, and they can't move too far from the spawner, so it's not like you're trying to stop a horde, although, frankly, that sounds like an improvement to the game. Instead, what we have mostly doesn't mean much except that you'll line up your attacks to hit the spawners too. But you do need to destroy them all to fight the cave's boss, and they do respawn when you leave the cave, so you have to fight them all in one go. In addition to combat and also rocks that we'll be able to mine once we get the hammer, there are fields in caves too, which you can grow crops in. Each cave is locked to a certain season, which lets you grow crops out of season and is also good for gathering various grasses that only spawn in certain seasons. In addition to the fixed season, which is extremely useful, we will be using that to build a money printer later on. The main reason you'd want to do this, at least theoretically, is that fully grown crops, and this applies to ones in your fields on the surface too, produce rune crystals that restore 25 of your 100 rune points once a day when they're fully grown. Only fully grown though, so if you want to create a supply of mid-dungeon recovery, it's going to take a few days while your crops grow and you can't actually harvest them. It makes it a whole lot less useful than it could be, although I do manage to find one good use for this system later on. But for now, though, I demonstrate how rusty I am and get my ass kicked by the first monster, barely making out alive. Well, that's embarrassing. Look, I haven't played this game since it was new, and I haven't played a game in this series since Rune Factory 3, the original release of Rune Factory 3. But okay, now that I've finished explaining most of the early stuff, I can speed things up a bit. I keep working on my farm, fishing, and grinding for levels in the cave. I do better after my first run, though the hornets on the second floor are brutal and take some time until I can reliably get past them. Rune Factory is from this older generation of action RPGs that aren't afraid to knock a few teeth out right from the start. The first enemies hit hard enough that you can die if you're careless, especially if your swordsmanship is low and thus your swings eat into your hit points a lot too. There are enemies that silence you, preventing you from casting escape, and the aforementioned hornets that hit hard from a distance, spawn up to 2 at a time, and can poison you. I also have it written down here to mention that I am every single day using the bathhouse after 3 p.m., which gives you a full hit point and rune point restore for only 10G. It gets you a lot more out of each day, so yeah, I use it very close to literally every day in this playthrough. Also, after I have the cave pass, Tabitha, the maid at the local mansion, gives me a friendship glove, so once I get a place to keep them, I can pet monsters into submission. Apparently that's all it takes to get a monster to give up on killing you and be your friend, you just have to pet them. On Friday, I do reach the end of the dungeon, but I still feel a bit undergeared, so I decide to leave it for now and give it a try next week. I start week 2 by checking in with Ivan, the traveling peddler, and buy a seed maker, an essential tool for my plan for strawberry-flavored world domination. The next day, I buy a bag of greenifier and some more strawberry seeds, using the greenifier on one of the seeds since it only works on the seeds, not plants that are still growing. If I had the foresight to know how soon the seed maker would be available, I would have done this with one of my initial batch of strawberries, but it's not a huge setback. The plan from here is that when it's ready to harvest, I'll take that one special strawberry and turn it into seeds. And then I use another greenifier on one plant from this new batch, and then I keep doing this for the rest of spring. And then I move this into the caves and continue it there. Okay, let's go into a little more detail here. Every item in this game has a level. For most stuff, especially crafted items, it's stuck at level 1. Monster materials, for some reason, always seem to drop at level 2, unless it's a weapon, which tends to drop at level 3. And the level of items from fishing and mining are randomized, though they will increase as your respective tools improve. The level is a flat multiplier to the cost of an item. So a level 5 item sells for 5 times the price of a level 1 version of that item. So how is this relevant here? Well, greenifier lets you, once per plant, while it's still a seed, increase the level of crop that a plant produces. And if you then turn that crop into a seed, that will result in a higher level package of seeds that creates a whole 9x9 field of crops of that level. There is a soft cap of level 10 for crops, though maybe there's some way to exceed it, maybe using the weird multiplayer feature where you could trade stuff back and forth to raise its level, which also, by the way, seems like an incredibly easy way to just break the game's economy just into its component molecules, basically. But for obvious reasons, that's not really an option here. But trust me, level 10 crops will be enough. For very obvious reasons, they do nerf the effective level on an item's selling price in later games, and you'll see why that's a very good thing. But hey, I'm not above taking full advantage of this while I can. Oh, and I also kill the first boss anyway, despite what I just said. Literally the next day without bothering to get any extra gear at all. It really was more a matter of just getting a cleaner run through the dungeon and maybe just being a little more well-leveled. That actually brings me to one part of these games. See, you can use a sleeping bag to rest in caves to get a partial recovery. Unfortunately, this kind of sucks. I did this maybe twice in my original playthrough back in the day, and not much more in this playthrough. Because in a game that's still half Harvest Moon, it's kind of detrimental to rest in dungeons, since it means missing out on other activities like watering and harvesting, especially before you have monsters to tend your farm for you. I just struggle to find a particularly strong use case, unless it's like needing a little bit more hit points right before a boss. It's not really efficient for leveling up, since you do not get a full heal from the sleeping bag, so you'll end up with less HP and RP than if you just retreated and then come back the next day. And caves are never really long or taxing enough to really require you to use the sleeping bag to get through them. I usually found it more effective to just go as far as I could and then teleport out when things get dicey, and more or less brute force things by level grinding that way until you can just clear a dungeon in one go. But really, the biggest issue with the sleeping bag is just that unless there's something I don't know about, you cannot upgrade it until you upgrade your house and gain the ability to do so yourself. There's not anyone who will upgrade for you like with your other tools. Until you do that, it only restores you up to a modest amount of hit points and restores no rune points. And at least in this playthrough, by the time I was able to upgrade it, it was pretty much useless. This also kind of ties into another reason that growing plants for runes is kind of useless. Early in the dungeon, they only really serve to let you recover if you go into the dungeon after doing some farming or a different dungeon, but with the bathhouse giving you a full recovery every evening, that isn't a huge deal, especially when your rune points go away so quickly. Meanwhile, later in the dungeon, where they'd be more useful, they suffer from the issue of requiring you to, get to them over and over again to grow them. Let's say you plant some crops for runes right outside the boss's door. Well, by the time they're ready, that means that you've been able to get through the dungeon probably at least 5 different times. So how much more help do you really need to be able to defeat the boss? If I had to guess, both runes and the sleeping bag were designed earlier on, and the dungeons never quite became as long or as brutal as they maybe had planned for them to be with the initial introduction of these systems. Honestly, I really want to play that Rune Factory game with the longer, tougher dungeons that required using these systems, but I digress. Mostly runes were only useful once I got healing magic. I had a few crops in the early dungeons near my house that I could quickly dive into, grab the runes, use healing magic to convert the small amount of rune points into a much larger amount of hit points, and basically use them as a source of infinite stamina. So runes aren't useless, they're just not really useful in enhancing your ability to get through your current dungeon. Anyway, after defeating the boss, the mayor wants me to till some ground in the first cave to get access to the second cave. I take care of that. It'll help me out a bit down the line. I'm sure they won't keep making me do this every single cave, right? Right? I also plant some grass seeds to get ready for when I do have monsters to feed, and I buy some seeds to at least try and make use of plants for runes in the second cave. And I also raid the rich guy's basement for a super rare but apparently mediocre bottle of wine and another empty bottle. The second dungeon, Tauros Cave, is a bit harder than the first cave, but not too much so. The big threat here is these demon enemies that can paralyze you and keep you from running, but once I get the status cure spell, that's a bit less of an issue. I do hit a bit of a roadblock figuring out how to get further in though. There's a door that requires me to clear all the spawners in the first floor to unlock it. Only gotta do this once, mind you, but I totally miss a path that contains one of the spawners I need for like a week. And because of the way the dungeon is laid out, I assume there's some other way to get there that I have to use, but no, I just was missing a path. Fortunately, this week I can start harvesting my strawberries, which are worth a lot, and regrow every couple of days. I've been struggling to get enough money for everything I want, but hopefully that ends here, and I'm only going to get richer and richer. I could really use some monster huts, and maybe a shield and other defensive equipment, plus a better weapon, and I do need to save some money for when Ivan visits on the weekends. Ultimately, I decide to put my first strawberry crop towards a monster hut so I can begin taming monsters as soon as I've built up a stock of feed, a status cure spell to save money on doctor visits, and then gradually spend on other things too as I get more money over the week, like a cookbook I'll need later, and a spell that can teleport me back to my house from anywhere outside of a cave. And lastly, this week, for having entered Tauros Cave, I get a hammer from the blacksmith, which means I can now start collecting ore and upgrading my tools. Something I'm going to be doing a lot of in the coming weeks. I start off week 3 by buying a shelf from Ivan along with a purely decorative table. The shelf means I can finally clear up some inventory space. The game gives you a fairly sizable 45 slots, but until you get to buying storage items, you don't get anything else. You have to keep everything you own in your pockets. I try and tame some sheep monsters, only to find out there's a 5-character name limit, and that greatly limits my ability to give them silly puns for names. But I do get a full shack of 4 of them. I can harvest their wool to sell, and also having them means I get a pile of monster care items from the various villagers. Since at this point I finally have enough money to buy some stuff, I buy a few new weapons, so let's talk about weapons a bit. One-handed swords are frankly just the best. Yes, they deal less damage, but they have longer combos, a nice swing arc, the fastest attack animations with the least start and end lag, a very good charge attack that shoots out a sword wave, and they're the only weapon that can equip shields for a defense boost. Plus, they're not that much weaker, especially as the game goes on, and Raguna's strength stat contributes more and more of your attack power. Two-handed swords and lances, meanwhile, are pretty similar. Lances have a more consistent attack speed and move forward a bit with their combos, while two-handed swords have very slow odd-numbered hits but very fast even hits. Two-handed swords have a round slash for a charge attack, while lances have a long rushing attack that probably could have been useful if I remembered it. Lastly, hammers and axes have no combos, slow swings, and their charge attacks are just hit it harder. You know, I really wanted to try other weapons and not just stick to one-handed swords, but it's really hard. Frankly, anything else makes it a lot more difficult to avoid getting hurt, so really, I'll have to wait till later games for the weapon balance to get better. It's also at this point that after being stuck on Tauros Cave for like a fucking week, I realized that there's another path out of the first room, and that's how I get to where the monster spawner is. Well, that's my bad, so let's finish this cave off. The boss is a chimera, and yeah, I kick its ass back home, go to do some stuff in town, and the mayor says he won't give me a pass and I should check out the library in the hot springs. Well, I just came from the springs, so I check out the library and find that Cecilia, one of the kids in town and the daughter of the librarian, has gone missing. So now the mayor will give me a pass to go search for her. And I do rush in, and I'm able to find her that night, but I guess I'll explore the rest of the dungeon the following day. Also, with my influx of money, I start investing in more useful things, like medicine. I also realized that feed doesn't regrow in this game, so it's not really worth it. Buying feed costs 100 per unit, and seeds cost 600 for a pack that will grow 9 feed. So it seems almost worth it if it's 50% more for your money, but when I'm watering it myself and still only have the cheap watering can, it's not worth the time it takes out of my day. Heck, even once I can have monsters farm it for me, it takes 9 days to grow, which means I basically need a full 3x3 patch for every monster I intend to keep, which gets unreasonable fast. In fact, it's really more like 3 patches for every 4, since you also need to store up feed for the winter. By comparison, most crops will cost less and have some combination of taking less time, being worth more than 100 per square, and regrowing to give you a continuous income. It's really just more efficient to grow crops for money and use it to buy feed. Growing it yourself is weirdly inefficient, and the only annoying thing about buying it is having to divvy it all out. I decide to finish the 3rd dungeon mostly through brute force, and even actually use the sleeping bag here. I take a couple tries to beat the boss because I am kind of brute forcing it, but I eventually get lucky, and the boss's summons are only the weaker monsters it can summon on the attempt that I win on. Plus, again, I got some small healing from the sleeping bag. Honestly, maybe I could have taken longer. I didn't have to beat this dungeon in 48 hours, but I felt the need to catch up after how long it took me to get through Tauros Cave. After the battle, Raguna, Mist, and Melody, the bathhouse owner, speculate that only the neighboring Setch Empire has the technology to build the devices that summon monsters. But even though we're near the border, they wouldn't risk war with the Norad Kingdom, and there's no reason they'd go after a small village like Cardia, right? right? Foreshadowing? What's that? And then the last day of week 3 is another surprisingly busy one. I swear these will get shorter at some point. But the last day is a festival day, the Spring Festival, basically Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, I don't think it's possible to do this on year 1. You need to make cookies to give to one of the possible bachelorettes to boost their relationship value, but I don't think you can buy them, and it's flatly impossible to be able to make them on year 1. So I guess this is mostly just to raise your love with someone if you're still not married on year 2. Unfortunately, this game can mostly be beaten in 1 year, marriage and all. Plus, the girl I'm aiming for is just outside of town on a normal schedule and ignores a lot of festivals, so I wonder if she'd even care. So it mostly keeps me from advancing too much for a couple days, since the following day is a weekend. My hammer's in the shop, so I can't even go mining, so I guess I weed my fields and go fishing then. I can't even go logging, since that is hard on the stamina and the hot springs are closed. Finally, week 4 gives us a slightly shorter week. Ivan is selling kitchen equipment this week, but I don't have a kitchen. Oh well. I get another monster hut built and then go to tame a set of 4 tundra spirits to fill it. These are very useful both as combat companions that can cast spells and heal, and because they can water my crops for me. I get the shit beaten out of me while taming them, but it's worth it. Also, if you're wondering why I always tame 4 of a given monster, that's how many fit in a single monster hut, and since you can't move them around, this is the only way for me to keep my huts nice and evenly filled with all of the same monster. Is it important? No, but I don't know. It makes things feel nice and neat and orderly, and I like that. Oh, and while each hut only costs 1000 G, it does also take 100 wood, so I can't go too crazy. I still need to save up for my house upgrade. But on the bright side, this now means I have enough monsters to water my field for me, so I can give up my watering can for a few days for a couple upgrades. And then getting the next pass requires me to till fields in the most recent dungeon again. This is getting to be kind of a pain. I get what they're going for, encouraging you to cultivate the land, but there's very little reason to go this far with tilling fields and dungeons, so it doesn't really feel like it's encouraging me to take my time and play Harvest Moon here. Actually, doing this is even kind of detrimental. Tilled fields won't spawn herbs or other useful resources. Sure, I could cultivate the fields, but that's a lot of work, especially as I would theoretically accumulate more and more fields I'm maintaining, and even more so early on when my watering can sucks. Though to be honest, mandating a certain number of crops grown in a dungeon, while tedious, might be more appropriate and on theme. Plus then at least you would have the runes or the opportunity to sell crops at the end. Not to mention it would actually do more to make you slow down, enjoy the village life, and, play Harvest Moon. They even do something similar to this later on. Maybe it's down to it working a certain way that couldn't really work here, I don't know. But still, I feel like that's a much better way to time gate the player's progression than here spend like 1 extra day tilling fields in this cave. There's also the egg show this week. Shame I don't have a chicken monster yet. Maybe if I could have been quicker on the dungeon clearing, I could have one. But then again, given when you can get access to chickens, this is probably just meant for year 2 instead. Still, it's another festival I miss out on. Oh, and I also realized that Sharon, the bachelorette I plan on pursuing, really likes fire crystals that can be mined easily in the most recent cave, so I have a way to make progress on that, I guess. Overall, it's been a pretty boring week after a lot of busy stuff. Hell, I didn't even record any footage this week. I just have been using B-roll. Okay, last week of spring. It's getting close to the end of the season, so instead of planting these level 4 strawberry seeds, I'm going to hold on to them. They wouldn't be ready to harvest before the end of the month. Naturally, I check in with Ivan, and all he'll sell in the last week of a month is a double bed, which I can't get until I get a bigger house anyway. At the end of last week, I did unlock the 4th dungeon, so let's start exploring. It's a rather cool cliff-top dungeon, although amusingly it is still functionally a cave, which means that it's not affected by, like, weather and such. And I actually make it all the way to the boss door in my first attempt, but I can't actually open it because several spawners are locked away behind fire barriers that'll need my watering can to get past. And that's in the shop. Oops. I have really bad luck with the timing of my tools being in the shop, huh? Oh well, more time to focus on mining and wood cutting. I've got over 500 wood now, so I'm getting there. And I get a couple of high-level gold ores that will be worth some really nice cash. This is also the point where I end up buying a couple offensive spells, just so I can use this as a chance to talk about them and why I won't bother using them. The big issues are twofold. They can only be cast with rune points, and they're less efficient at turning rune points into damage compared to just using a sword. And here's the thing, there's no skill to make magic cheaper, and your rune points never increase during this game. So to make frequent use of offensive spells, you need rune point recovery, which requires either taking things slower and growing crops, or finding some other way to restore them. I guess there's cooking, but we'll get to the issues with that, and we've already talked about the issues with the sleeping bag. Plus, this is a DS game. The screen is not huge, and you're controlling your character with the D-pad, so you're kind of limited in being able to use these spells to get your first hits in. And if you need a ranged attack, there's always the one-handed sword's charge attack. So yeah, we are not bothering with magic here. Then there's one more festival I can't enter, the cook-off. Once again demonstrating that it really does feel like spring festivals were chosen to encourage playing through a second year. Again, even though you can beat this game in one. If I had a bit more foresight, maybe I could have bought the kitchen on day one and then bought the stuff I needed when Ivan was selling kitchen equipment, but unless you have that foresight and really work hard on getting 1000 G in day one, you're just not going to have the kitchen before summer. And then on the 28th is a typhoon. Great. For those not familiar with Harvest Moon, these mean you can't go outside on a day, basically losing a day, and also your fields get fucked up. Oh, and today was supposed to be the day I get my watering can back too. Oh well, it could have been much worse, I guess. But man, my farm is fucked up, including some large boulders I can't break without the level 3 hammer. Well, I know what I'm upgrading next. But then, once I have the watering can, I can do a few things. First, I plant the level 4 strawberry seeds I have in the game's first cave, and fertilize one plot with greenifier, as you're now used to. I'll also use the growth speed booster on that patch every day. I've been doing similar with one from each plot of strawberries on my farm once I hit the point that I had the money for it. And this continues much as it did on the farm itself. Once the special strawberry grows, I turn it into seeds and repeat the process to make even higher level strawberries. More on that when it reaches completion. Second, I can explore the rest of Mount Gigant and find that this is where I can tame the monster equivalents of your typical Harvest Moon cows and chickens. I'll have to make 2 more huts and tame some of these. But for now, my priority is finishing off the cave, since I can now access all the spawners. The boss is a dragon, which is mostly pretty easy, even though my wind sword is really ineffective against it and I didn't bring a spare weapon. It does get a bit harder during phase 2 because it gets way faster and gains some powerful spells, and it does manage to kill me once in phase 2. But on the second attempt, I fight more conservatively and get a win. Afterwards, the cutscene shows a mysterious woman appear who has a laugh that suggests that she is definitely evil. And on the last day of spring, I'm a bit tired from the boss battle since I slept in the dungeon to have a bit more health for the fight. So my morning is mostly spent screwing around and buying supplies for the first few days of summer, like seeds. Then I remember I can get some runes to get enough rune points to cast Cure, and decide I'll end off spring by buying 3 new monster huts and stocking them up. It'll cut into my wood supplies, but once I upgrade my axe, I'll be able to make much faster progress on that too. Oh, and of course, you know what the mayor wants. Plow the fields in the latest dungeon to unlock the next one. At this point, I just wish there were different things it wanted me to do to unlock new dungeons. I mean, I guess the conversation chain to unlock the third one kind of counts. but they keep using this one. It's especially annoying when I could really use the extra space for stumps to spawn in, but I do what I can while I'm collecting new friends. I go back to the first dungeon and pick up 4 orcs that can harvest my crops for me, and then in the latest dungeon I get 4 cows and 4 chickens for their respective resources. I also realize at this point that the feed counts are per hut, and I've been putting all my feed into just the first one. Oops. Although humorously, the friendship lost from starving is still less than what I've been able to build up just by brushing my tundras every day, so it's not that big of a deal. Still, I'll be more careful about that from now on. I down a potion to keep going a bit longer, and then I finish things up by preparing my fields for summer. So, now that spring's over, let's take a little intermission and review our progress before going on to summer. First off, I've reached level 42. I've gotten the tier 3 watering can. No other tier 3 tools, but my hammer will hit tier 3 soon. And tier 3 is the cap until I can get my house upgraded. The skill ranks I've got are on screen here. Unsurprisingly, swordsmanship and farming are the highest. As for money, I've got 120k, though after my recent building spree, I am down to 440 wood. My goal is to upgrade my house by the end of the summer, which does feel doable at this point. I'm pretty sure I've acquired all the major farming monsters I'll need. I'm getting along well with the townsfolk. Most are hitting Friendship 3, which means I can visit them whenever I like. And Sharon, the girl I intend to pursue, is up at max friendship and 4 points of love. Oh, yeah, that's one unique feature of Rune Factory compared to its regular Harvest Moon contemporaries. The characters you can marry have separate friendship and love stats, which I think is a nice touch. Some girls it can be quite hard to raise the ladder, though. And lastly, I finished 4 dungeons, which is probably good progress. I don't think there's too many more. And that's where I'm at so far. I'm set to make most of the purchases from Ivan that I missed during the summer. And the plan to acquire all of the world's money through strawberries is in progress, even though it's looking, at this point, very unnecessary. So let's start summer. And summer starts off with a festival. Ivan is still in town though, so I buy a kitchen and a fridge. It does end up being a shorter day since the festival means that the bathhouse is closed, but I get all my seeds planted. And on the next day, I finally can go to the mayor to get the pass for the next cave and... oh. It's Misty Bloom Cave already. I, really rushed through this game, huh? Misty Bloom is this cave here, surrounded by water I could totally jump if the game had a button for that. In Harvest Moon tradition, this is a cave that can only be accessed during the winter. So that's 2 whole months I have to wait. It's especially funny because, to be honest, the whole reason I was rushing through things was to get to the point where I have access to Misty Bloom Cave with enough time, because one even bigger issue with Misty Bloom is not having to wait. It's the possibility, though obviously not going to happen here, that if you don't beat it in winter, you have to wait a whole additional year for it to open back up again. But I averted that, so instead I get 2 whole seasons of taking things easy and relaxing while I work on building up my house. And hey, this does mean the video will go by a bit faster now, since I will mostly just be playing a farming sim and making small reports. Anyway, since we have a kitchen, it's time for a primer on cooking, or why Raguna can live off rice balls alone. So, cooking. Harvest Moon typically has very robust recipe books to put your fresh produce to use, and Rune Factory is no different. And with all these fancy new RPG systems, there's tons of stuff for food to affect. Unfortunately, there's no way to learn what any food does in-game except by making note of your stats, eating it, and then noting what has changed, which makes it kind of a pain to figure out which food is good and worth using. If you want to make use of cooking, you're honestly better off just looking up the effects online than trying to figure it out yourself. And I'm trying to do a minimum amount of looking stuff up online for this run, so yeah, kind of an issue. So instead I'm just going to stick to a tip I got from the game guide that I had back in the day, since some details from that and the resulting playthrough are just still stuck in my head almost 20 years later. And that tip is just make rice balls. Rice is cheap, rice balls don't take a very high cooking skill to guarantee success, you don't need any cookware to make it, you can just make it on the counter, and they restore just enough rune points, enough to cast a single healing spell. So whenever I need more stamina from now on, I can eat a rice ball and then use the small amount of rune points to cast Cure and restore a much larger portion of hit points. This is going to allow me to get a lot more done, with the only downside really being there is a cooldown between eating food items, which is also the duration of the buffs that food gives. This mostly just means you can't spam food as your only way of recovery, but it's still very useful. And then the last thing of note this week is that having the tier 3 silver hammer has meant that I can make a ton of money. Mining can easily get level 10 or higher gems that sell for thousands each. My income from rubies has actually surpassed my income from strawberries so far. A single ruby at level 15, yeah, that's 10k right there. In fact, by the end of the week I've blown past the 200k needed for a house upgrade and even past 250k. I don't think I'll even need the strawberry exploit after all. Still gonna do it though, but just having the silver hammer has already broken the economy on its own. We're gonna talk more about that in the concluding section. And then week 7 gets off to a really bad start. Typhoon on the weekend means that I miss out on Ivan's shop for the week, and I won't be able to get the various tools to refine wool, milk, and eggs into more valuable products for another month. Well, it's not like I really needed the extra profits, but it's still a pain. After doing some work clearing my fields and continuing my strawberry plan, I get my new axe, and so now I can spend the next few days focused on nothing but wood cutting. I really need that house upgrade. I also realized it takes 2,000 wood, not 1,000 wood. Oops. But after staying up too late one day chopping wood and ending up with a cold, I'm about halfway there. Unfortunately, I'm also running out of easy to access wood. Here's kind of the issue with the wood grind. Once you get the easy stuff, there's nothing to do except wait and hope. Honestly, if I had remembered how much of an issue this was, I would have upgraded my axe way sooner and been more diligent about chopping stumps where I could, but till you get at least the tier 3 axe, stumps take so many swings to chop that it's really hard on your stamina. Most of my effort here goes into repeatedly clearing out Toro's cave, since it is perpetually autumn there and stumps and branches spawn more in the fall. And then I also work on buying up all the books from the bookstore, since I have enough money that I might as well, even if I can't use them until the house upgrades. At least I intend to. I end up missing out on most of them because I'm spending so much time in the caves looking for wood to chop. Well, whatever. I'll gradually pick them up over the rest of the time with this game. On week 8, the weekly trip to Ivan's doesn't really yield anything. I already have the table and shelf, so there's nothing to buy here until I upgrade my house. I do max out my relationship with Sharon, so hopefully at some point I'll be able to marry her. And I've also cleared out my field to make more room for wood to hopefully spawn. And also cleared out Mount Gigant's field so that I can hopefully get some wood from its large number of fields. And then on Tuesday, the 15th of summer, I cross the 200 wood threshold and immediately run to Newman's to get my house upgraded. It takes 10 days, so it'll be done by the end of summer. I still have plenty of money, so I spend the week mostly finishing off buying the books I need. And now, we wait. There is honestly not much to do now. I guess I'll run Mount Gigant to level grind and gather monster materials, and maybe try and spend a bit more time making friends with the locals. I don't really have much else to do. I still have a load of money. Still have a month and a half for Misty Bloom Cave, and there's a lot I can't do until my house is upgraded. It's also this week that I noticed there's an expiry stat on food items. I'm going to leave some milk in the fridge for a few months and see what happens. I also get a small event where Tabitha, the maid at the local mansion who gave me the monster taming glove, reveals that she's an elf. And in a similar vein, a small conversation with young Cecilia has her point out that her own ears are a bit different and similar to Tabitha's, but she's young and doesn't seem to notice the significance. These are some interesting conversations, and the only time I come across any interactions like this. I'm sure there are plenty of others, but I did not discover them, and that's kind of the issue. And lastly, there's a festival at the end of the week, the Dairy Show. Because of this, I can't buy the last set of books. And also, I still lose the festival, even though I do have cows that are getting pretty friendly. So I go to vent frustration by fighting monsters in the caves. Week 9, I start off with my weekly visit to Ivan's. He's selling some cookware, so I buy what will fit in my current kitchen. I mean, cooking isn't worth much, as I already mentioned, but I still want to fill out my house. On Monday, I buy another monster hut and fill it with hornets, since I realize I can also gather honey for them. It's on Wednesday the 22nd that I get a level 9 strawberry. This project is almost done. Instead of putting greenifier on one and speeding that one's growth up to the maximum, I'll put greenifier on all of them and just let them grow normally until I have my level 10 strawberries. Honestly, at this point I am doing this just to complete what I started, but I'm going to do it. I also find that the monsters from the spawner closest to the Clemens Cave entrance can drop protein, an item that permanently increases my strength and thus my physical attack by 1, and so that's probably going to be a major farming spot for me from now on. There are these various items that give a very small boost to your stats, hit points, or your attack and defense for one of the elements. I think I've already gotten a couple different ones from various monster drops throughout the game. They're available as rare drops from specific monsters or can be crafted later. Since they give single points at a time, they're not that worth it in my eyes to pursue in depth. Okay, the hit point one gives you 3 hit points, but that's still not a lot. Either way, crafting them seems less efficient because crafting most of these will require farming monster materials anyway, so it's probably better to just farm them directly like this. And hey, it's not like I've got anything else to do until my house is upgraded besides stand around and farm monsters. I might as well get a little extra from it. It's that or farming materials, and I've done plenty of that, and my cabinet is looking pretty full. Also on that Wednesday, I randomly talk with Leo. It's raining, so he's drinking at the pub, and he mentions they made a promise to his master long ago to forge a sword from these scales of the mythical grimoire. Well, that just so happened to be the thing I fought atop Mount Gigant, so I run home, grab the scales off my shelf, give it to him, and he tells me to talk to him again about it in 3 days. Last week of summer, and things can finally get interesting. On the holiday to start the week, my house is finally upgraded. This will allow me to buy larger furniture, as well as including a whole second area that comes pre-equipped with crafting equipment for weapons, shields, accessories, and medicine. We need the appropriate books to use them, but hey, look, I already bought those. So let's talk about crafting. First off, as a random quirk, you can't make the bottom tier weapons and certain accessories. You can only upgrade these into new forms, which is odd, but all it means is you still have to use the shops occasionally, no big deal. Second is that materials for all of these are not consumed on a failure. I've always assumed it was for technical reasons. These recipes include using one-of-a-kind items like empty bottles and your tools, and maybe the way it was coded just didn't allow them to just designate some items as not being lost on a failure. But this has the benefit that as long as I have a 1% chance of succeeding at crafting something, I can brute force it, and I don't need to get any extra materials to prepare for failure. In fact, this is in some ways one of the more efficient ways to grind your crafting skill levels, since you still get a bit of XP on failures, and when you finally succeed, you're likely to get a good chunk of it. Just be careful to not accidentally KO yourself doing this. Doesn't happen in this run, but it definitely happened in my original playthrough as a kid. But on the topic of materials, some of these are only available in the last few dungeons, so I can't get the very best weapons before winter comes. Heck, it's not even always amazing stuff. Some entire branches require late game materials, even just to get the early stuff. Devil Blood comes up a lot. And also the game does not tell you anywhere what monsters drop what. You can usually figure it out. There's a good number of obvious ones, but sometimes you can't really do anything but flail around and kill stuff that sounds about right until you find the material you need. And then as an added annoyance, some monster materials can't be used for anything, I don't think, unless I'm just missing like one single specific use they have. Then of course there is tool upgrades. Now I have the option to upgrade my tools past tier 3, which hasn't really been a concern, but it is nice to have. If you have any tools that aren't at tier 3, then there's a bit of a trade-off. Upgrading yourself is quicker and does give you a lot of forging experience, but can often take rarer materials. Also, this is the only way to upgrade your sleeping bag to not be completely trash. On my very first day with the forge in my house, I managed to brute force my way to crafting a defender sword. And I also upgrade my sleeping bag, and yeah, this is the point where I realize how much experience you get for upgrading your sleeping bag or your tools. The decoration skill used to craft accessories and upgrade your sleeping bag jumps all the way up to decoration 22 for just crafting the first upgrade. Then that lets me guarantee the next upgrade, which slingshots me to 32, and then I don't have the materials for the last two, but this is still giving me a huge skill boost. And as mentioned, this does apply to farming tools too for the forging skill. I will say though that some crafting recipes, especially in the medicine field, do have the same problem as cooking, that they can just be too much effort. Greenifier comes to mind. If you want to craft it, you'll need an earth crystal and 4 separate monster drops, including the aforementioned Devil Blood that can only be found in the penultimate dungeon. I genuinely wonder if any player has ever crafted it in this game. It only costs like 700 G to buy. Plus, like, even if you're doing some weird challenge run where you can only buy the bare minimum of things, like, you still need the house upgrade in order to craft it. So by the time you can craft it, you don't need the extra money you would get from selling higher level crops. This is weird. Anyway, there's also some weird crafting chains, especially in decorations, where sometimes an item with a lower skill requirement requires an item with a higher skill requirement, and in general you can really get lost in crafting. Time doesn't pass in your house, so this can give you a lot of time to craft. This also makes for a great way to burn off any remaining stamina at the end of the day, if it's after midnight but you still have some left. All in all, forging and decoration are really valuable, and pharmacy is alright. The big advantage pharmacy gives you is that it lets you make higher tier potions, which are kind of necessary to keep up with the growth in your hit point stat as the game goes on, but that's kind of it. Anyway, with all our introduction to crafting done, I also buy a double bed from Ivan. Not the most exciting, but necessary to get married. That Monday is the Treasure Hunt, a festival where I'm told to find a book in Carmite Cave, the very first cave, with the hint of a dead end. I find it almost immediately. Actually, you can find the spot at any time, and if you hit interact, Draguna will weirdly comment on this spot even if it's empty. Since I had already found it in my initial exploration of the cave back at the beginning of the game, I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and it was especially easy to find the book here. I'm given the choice of reward of 100 grand, 1,000 wood, or an empty bottle. Once again, we're on Zelda rules here, so the empty bottle is the priceless treasure that we pick, even if it does sound like the mayor is just giving us random junk from his shelf. It's not like we need the other rewards anyway, since we already upgraded our house. And then Tuesday is raining again, further delaying the stuff I want to pick up from Leo, and ensuring I still can't seriously start my forging without a shop. Great. But I still managed to get at least some smithing done. Okay, on Wednesday, I can finally pick up my fishing rod and the Grimoire sword, which is unfortunately only decorative, but it will be important soon. Leo alludes that I should give it to someone special. I also forged the Luck Blade, a powerful one-handed sword with with a high crit rate. Remember the game guide I had for this back in the day suggested this was good enough to beat the game with. But look, my attitude towards that is the same now as back then. Why stop at some mid-tier sword when there's so many stronger options? It's like leaving part of the game unplayed. Besides, what the fuck else am I going to do with the entire month I have to wait for Misty Bloom? Then on the last day of summer, a few things happen. First, I get a new harvest of wool, so another sleeping bag upgrade. And then my first crop of level 10 strawberries is done. I turn these 9 into seeds, clear out all the lower tier ones, and then fill the first few plots of the first cave with them for a total of 100 strawberries. Just 8 more days and production will finally be at full power. I will finally have what I need to completely break the game's economy wide open. A month after I got the silver hammer and thus stopped needing any other source of income. Well, at least I'll be able to say I did it. Then, after all of that work, I buy seeds for fall so I can keep pretending to play normal Harvest Moon, and then I focus on upgrading my tools. There's a bit of brute force needed since I'm at 1% to craft the next upgrades at first, but once I get one, my forging skill shoots up, and the rest become easier, at least the ones I have materials for. So, time for another intermission. Is everyone hanging in there? Maybe you want to grab some water or use the restroom. We're about halfway through by game time, and probably well over that in video time. Thankfully, summer was way quicker than spring, and fall will probably be even shorter since I've done most of the explaining systems here. Summer was pretty uneventful, but we still made some progress, so let's check in. I'm level 78, got the house upgrade, and started forging level 4 tools and better weapons. Skills are coming along nicely, swordsmanship is nearing 99, while my forging and decoration skills are coming along nicely thanks to the huge boost from crafting tools. I'm completely set for money for the rest of the game at 500,000. That's kind of an issue with this game. Money is very restrictive until you cross a certain point, namely getting the silver hammer, and suddenly it's way too easy to make all the money you need through either, as mentioned, mining or selling high-leveled crops. I also have enough wood for a few more monster huts if I want them, but since my house has been upgraded, wood is not really an issue anymore. And I've also definitely gotten all the farming monsters I'll need, so at this point, maybe I should get a combat monster since they won't mess with my neatly arranged monster huts. Although that implies I need the help, which is looking less and less likely at this point. As for other stuff, most of the town likes me, with no one sitting below a friendship of 4. Obviously I haven't cleared out any more dungeons because of the Misty Bloom Cave roadblock, but my house is coming along nicely and I'll be able to buy the last few upgrades from Ivan during the fall. At this point, most of what's left for me is the RPG sort of farming to get what gear upgrades I can track down prior to Misty Bloom. I can only assume fall is going to be even less exciting, so I'll try and cut it down to just the highlights. Honestly, this wouldn't be bad if I still had meaningful farm work to do, but at this point I'm just maintaining my normal farm for the fun of it and raising the strawberries to say I did it. But I've kind of already won at the Harvest Moon part of the game, so the wait is kind of killing me. I'm also going to not go too much into the new gear I craft unless it's important, since I'm going to be doing a lot and I want to speed this up. Week 11, I start off by planting a bunch of crops in my field, but on Wednesday there's another early typhoon. What is with these early season typhoons ruining my nice, neat fields? That's actually all I took note of this week. Next. Week 12, to start things off, I finally buy the various farm refining items from Ivan, not that I need them. And the 7th is also a festival, the Harvest Festival. Give people vegetables and they'll like you more. I have some crops ready in my field, so I do that to make people like me more. But then my strawberry crop is fully ready. I actually wait one more day until all of them are producing fruit together, and then I harvest them. Now, to give you an idea of how much money this makes, a normal strawberry is worth 200 G. These are level 10, so they're worth 10 times that, 2000 G. With 10 plots and stacks of 9 strawberries each, that's 90 strawberries. So Each shipment is worth 180k. That's 90% of the cost of the house upgrade. If I made 2 more, then every harvest I would get enough money to afford the house upgrade. So since these regrow quickly, that's about 2 house upgrades a week. But I'm only going to ship these once because I don't need the money. I just wanted to do this to have done it. Then Thursday we get hit by yet another typhoon. Man, I am glad I don't care about the farm at this point. It's getting really fucked up. Then week 13, a bit more happens after 2 very briskly paced weeks that you mostly just got to skip through, but I had to play. Anyway, Ivan's in town, so I buy a bigger shelf so I have more room for my smithing projects. Old shelf was getting full again. And I also get a bigger table set because it's pretty. Interestingly, I also think these are some of the only home items where the larger ones actually cost more than the smaller ones. You know, like you would think. I mean, it could also be a text mistake with the others. I would not put it past this game. And then on Monday, the 14th of fall, I decide to do something that's been a long time coming. I grab the Grimoire sword and I give it to Sharon, and we're married. No, don't worry, you didn't miss anything. It really was quite abrupt. Maybe I failed to properly trigger any special events with Sharon because of how I got her to like me too much before I was able to start visiting her at the inn. There's really not much evolution in this relationship. I didn't even see any indication anywhere that the Grimoire sword is how you propose to her. I just remember it from the game guide I had back in the day and stumbled across the way to get it in this playthrough. Also, this does bring up the matter that the game feels like it has no idea how old Raguna and the other characters implied to be around his age, so the bachelorettes and a few other guys in town that are positioned as also being interested in some of the ladies. Because some of the older adults do call Raguna a kid, but he's able to get married and start a family. Some of the characters say he's too young to drink, but he can buy and consume wine at the bar. It's just kind of weirdly inconsistent. And because this has an anime-ish art style, good luck guessing how old he is by appearances. But then, after the wedding, it's right back to the grind. I've run out of new stuff to craft now, so I'm mostly grinding up my forging and decorating skill levels to get to points where I'll need them later. The former I do by upgrading broadswords along the water elemental path until they become snow queens, since that is the highest level weapon I can make and have materials for, and also the whole line only requires a few different materials, making it fairly easy to farm. And then the decorating skill I raise by crafting various minor accessories, usually made with just a gem and an ore, that seem to exist mostly to sell and because they're in other Harvest Moon games. And then later that week is Moonlight Eve, a festival where you can invite a girl out to view the moon with you, and hilariously, it seems to be more of a couples who are dating thing, not a married couple thing, because I cannot do this now that I am married, which is weird and disappointing. I would have put things off if I knew this would happen. I mean, there's no real loss except for the text, but it's still a shame to miss out on it. Although hilariously, the option does still show up when I talk to other girls in town, which is really funny. I can't invite my own wife out to these, but yeah, it's weird. Actually, this does bring up the topic that after you marry someone, they kind of just stand in place in your house with a minimal number of lines that do at least change with your story progress. There are still some festivals where you can interact, and they'll usually comment on them, but yeah, they mostly just stand in this one spot. Actually, that brings up the question. What happens if you marry Melody, the woman who runs the bathhouse? Most of the girls you can marry don't serve any in-game functions, but Melody serves a very important role. Do you just lose access to the bathhouse? Does someone else take over? Does she actually retain some autonomy and go to work? Are you able to just walk in there or something? I'm curious. Let me know in the comments if you have an answer about this. Anyway, lastly, while grinding materials on Friday, I hit level 99 swordsmanship. Kinda cool, it'll ensure any weapons that I use will consume minimal stamina, but it is kind of lame how swordsmanship only reduces stamina use, not anything else. It doesn't make you actually better, at least not in this game. Anyway, after the only week in fall that takes much time to go through, week 14, I buy the last kitchen appliances from Ivan, even though I'll never use them, but hey, I've got everything he has to sell now, so that's something done. And then on Monday, I hit level 99? In my first playthrough, aside from, not finishing Mount Gigant until a much more reasonable amount of time into the game, I only hit level 99, right before the final boss. Things are gonna get interesting when winter comes around, aren't they? I'm a little concerned. But I spend a good amount of effort this week working on my decoration skill, since my forging skill is mostly high enough. And then on Friday it's the Wool Festival. No actual prize here, but I win and it does apparently make everyone like me more, so I guess that's neat. It helps make sure that I'm gonna have even higher friendship levels by the end of this. Week 15. Are we there yet? Well, yes, almost. Nothing new from Ivan this week, or ever again for that matter. I'll kind of miss starting each week with saying that I went to visit Ivan. I get decoration high enough that I can craft even the most difficult accessories, so that's one more thing down. Kinda running out of stuff to level grind right now. I also get 3 consecutive days of rain this week. Would be neat if that actually benefited me much. If I still had reasons to tend crops or, didn't have an army of tundra spirits that could water all my crops for me. And then on Thursday, there's Fishing Day, a final, not quite festival for fall. 2 characters even acknowledge it. One suggests I should give people fish, so I give her a fish and she likes it. Then I give the other person who even acknowledges the day a fish and she doesn't like it. Fuck it, I'm going back to the caves for the rest of the season. If my wife needs me, tell her I'm in a cave somewhere. And that's the end of fall, and this will be our last intermission, so let's see here. I've hit level 99 as well as 99 swordsmanship. My other skills are coming along nicely. Decorations at 70, which is enough to have a shot at crafting even the most difficult accessory in the game. Forging's a little bit further behind, but it's as high as I need it to be, and we'll get a little bit more of a boost once I can finish off my tool upgrades, and pharmacy is lagging a little behind because there's not much to do with it. For equipment, I mainly have the Star Saber, the highest level wind elemental one-handed sword, and the Hero Certificate, an accessory that gives a nice big plus 15 strength. In fact, thanks to farming for protein, with the Hero Certificate, I have a max 99 strength. Fuck, I had way too much time to kill in this game, didn't I? Summer and especially fall might have seemed really quick for you, but they were pretty tedious for me to play through. If there's a lesson in here, it's don't rush through the game yourself, if you do play it at all. And then I have 2.4 million G. I could buy 12 house upgrades. Money is just really broken and worthless in this game. At this point, I'm probably richer than the guy who has a mansion. Oh, and of course, I got married and maxed out my house, which are the major milestones I crossed in fall. Well, with fall done, the wait is over. After half a year of screwing around, I can finally go into Misty Bloom Cave. Hey, Editor Mikhail, let's get some rock music queued up. Winter's gonna be a lot of combat. Oh, and I should also mention that there's also going to be a lot of story stuff I go into here just because I felt like it. I don't know, this is the point where the story starts happening. So, I don't know. If you really don't want spoilers, I'd say skip to the concluding chapter. This is your chance to jump off. Are they gone? Okay, let's finish this off with a sprint to the end. As soon as week 16 starts, I rush straight to Misty Bloom Cave and get an odd conversation with Mist about nothing in particular. And then fighting through the dungeon is a piece of cake. Enemies go down in 1 or 2 hits and deal 1 damage to me. All that free time definitely got me overleveled. I am so overleveled that I reach the boss in 1 day and defeat the Siren basically immediately. 1 full combo per phase of the boss fight. That was even easier than expected. And after the fight there's a brief discussion about Raguna's memories, but that's it. And with that done, we can start getting resources from Misty Bloom to make a few more upgrades, including using the gems found here to upgrade our watering can. The next day, between farming for various materials in the cave, Mayor Godwin asks me to plow 100 squares in Misty Bloom. Yeah, this again. Fortunately, it's going to go a lot faster than the ones back in spring did, since I have upgraded my tools quite a bit. Man, imagine if you beat this cave like late in winter and didn't see this until after it was too late for you to go back in. I'm sure this has to have happened to someone out there, as unlikely as it is, and I can only assume their game cartridge was thrown in a fire shortly after. With that done, I can go to the Casimir Ruins, which is the place that Sharon would always hang out around before we got married. And there's also an ominous statement when I get the pass that the Setch Empire seems to be on the move. I'm sure that's not going to amount to anything. And while the Casimir Ruins are similarly easy, I do quickly hit a roadblock. A door that says it opens for the blessing of the land, which means I gotta slow things down and cultivate the fields near the door. Okay, sure. Well, I'll have more time to farm in Misty Bloom while I wait, I guess. Oh yeah, Sharon would also normally be found inside the ruins once a week, but since we're married, she doesn't leave the house, and I miss out on any special dialogue she might have for the situation. Then Friday is the Winter Festival. I get some chocolate from Sharon, and that's about it. If you're still single, I think you can get more from the other girls, but there's not much else going on with the festival. Some dialogue, and that's it. Everything's still open. Then at the start of week 17, my radishes in the ruins have grown and the door is open. And there's another locked door that Raguna somehow intuits that Sharon will know something about. I mean, to be fair, she does hang out around here a lot. I clear out the floor, getting some materials, notably including platinum. Then I go back home to talk to Sharon and do some smithing. Sharon just says something about a golem. That doesn't help at all. But with my 6 platinum, I upgrade my hammer to the highest level, and also upgrade my shield to a knight shield, which is giving me an even more unnecessary strength boost when I'm already at the cap. I go into a random side room, the back next to the crop door, and a mini golem shows up. After killing it in 2 hits, it drops the key. I don't finish the dungeon this day, but I do end up staying up till like 3 a.m. farming drops. Oops. Next day I do clear it though. The boss is a larger golem. Sharon shows up and comments that she thought these were the Grimoire's ruins. Then I beat the shit out of the golem, and at least it doesn't die as instantly as the siren did. And then I have a bit more of a conversation about the grimoire with Sharon. Maybe this is meant to hint at how you propose to her. But she also comments on how the monster spawners are new, and we come to the conclusion that only the Setch Empire could have made them. Who would have thought? And with Mist showing up, there's a discussion of how Raguna has absolutely become a part of the town of Cardia, and as a nice touch, the conversation even changes to mention that I married Sharon. I always love when games remember to take into account possibilities like this and have special dialogue for it. It's just that extra little bit of care and attention that I always love to see. I talked to the mayor, and he says the Setch Empire has been moving materials into Danon Cave. Raguna volunteers to help, and the mayor gives him the pass immediately. No tilling fields required. Everyone in town's getting worried about the possible invasion, but I mean, to heck with that. For today, I'll just focus on farming stuff from Casimir. I upgrade my shield to the Rune Shield, the best shield in the game that notably provides some small status resists and a boost to all of my elemental attack and defense values. I buy a critical ring at the shop, since those are for sale now, and I've needed one for something I've been hoping to craft and haven't had the materials for. Although it turns out the courage badge I make with it is pretty much just worse than my hero certificate. Oh well, more weird progression, I guess. And I upgrade my old luck blade into a smash blade. I'm not going to use it, but it is key to something I will craft soon. I'm able to make the level 5 watering can, and I'm quite close to getting the tier 5 sickle as well. And then the next day I start Danon Cave properly. Mist mentions the Setch Empire's weapon being stored here, and I go for it. And I immediately get distracted when I find the monster that drops Devil Blood. Priorities. First, I do get the tier 5 sickle, not urgent or related to getting into this cave, but it's a milestone. Then after a bit of a detour to farm a skull, I craft a cursed ring, which gives -30 to all stats. I could equip this to make the game, fair, maybe. But no, the reason I do this is to upgrade it to the Happy Ring, the ultimate accessory that gives plus 80% resistance against all status effects. With the Rune Shield, that's 85% resistance to poison, silence, and paralysis. And then the Hero Certificate gives it complete immunity to topple and knockback. Between that night and the next morning, I'm able to get all the Devil Blood I need for one of my main goals of this playthrough. First, I upgraded the Aqua Sword I was saving with Devil's Blood and a Scorpion Tail to make the Sakura Sword. Then 2 more Devil Blood and another Scorpion Tail turned that into the Soul Eater. Then I combined the Soul Eater, the Smash Blade, a Needle Strike I made at some point with more Devil Blood, another Scorpion Tail, and Poison Powder to create the Chaos Blade, one of the ultimate one-handed swords. Compared to the Rune Blade, the Chaos Blade is weaker, but has a myriad of special effects. Plus 30% crit rate, 12% health drain, and the ability to inflict paralysis. This was my sword of choice the first time I played through as well, and here it's even more important that I use it, since I know that it's only really this good in Rune Factory 1. In later games, simplifications to equipment mean it loses the critical chance and health drain, so it's not as exciting or special. Have I mentioned I'm still only taking 1 damage from attacks? I really just do not need this, but I have it anyway, and the chance to drain a bit of health gives me even more longevity. Then I reach another door that requires me to grow crops to open it. Fuck. Wish I'd known that before I spent a couple of days farming Devil Blood. Well, I run to the general store to get seeds, and before I head back I also use some materials I've got to upgrade my Shine Blade to the Razor, the strongest fire elemental two-handed sword that I was intending to use to craft the ultimate two-handed sword, but I just never get my forging high enough to do that, and considering one-handed swords are better and I'm as overpowered as I am, I think you know how little I need to go to the trouble of grinding my forging to get the ultimate two-handed sword. But well, I guess I'll be focused on even more grinding and crafting until the crops are ready. Next I get the level 5 axe, then I upgrade my Grand Smasher to the Grand Tail, the ultimate Earth Elemental two-handed sword, and again, a product of my ultimately pointless pursuit of the ultimate two-handed sword. And I also upgrade my old Defender to a Platinum sword because I was thinking about making the Rune Blade, but I never actually get around to that either. Look, grinding up forging is difficult, and I'm getting so close to the end that I just don't really feel the need to finish these projects I've been starting. Week 18, I spend the first few days just gathering materials, mostly stuff for medicine. I also lose a day of progress to a blizzard, damn it. Then finally, the crops are grown, and I can tear through Danon Cave. Another door requires a key, which I am made to dig around in a field earlier on to gain access to. It's kind of weird how just like the second and third to last dungeons have keys to find. I do kind of like it because it helps to make the progression a bit less of just a straight shot to the end. I know backtracking is one of those things that it's easy to hate on, but you know, a light sprinkling of it really does wonders to make a game not feel as linear and straightforward. The problem here is that the only dungeons that do this also are the ones that require you to just not progress for a few days while crops grow, which makes these keys feel kind of like filler. I honestly don't hate the doors that require you to grow crops either, and maybe if they were in some earlier dungeons, the pacing of this game would have been better. Then I reach the boss room, and the lady with pink hair from earlier shows up. She introduces herself as Lynette, a commanding officer of the Setch Empire, and she reveals she's here investigating the Grimoire, which Raguna thinks he defeated, but apparently that was just a mere dragon. Please nobody tell Sharon that the sword I used to propose to her was not made from the scales of the actual grimoire. And don't tell Leo that he actually hasn't fulfilled his master's dream either. I do find it kind of hilarious how this little twist means that my marriage is based on a lie, though. I feel like this was not necessarily thought all the way through. But anyway, the true grimoire is apparently strong enough to destroy a country, and Lynette wants to control it. Yep, I can see no way this can possibly go poorly for her. Trying to control something that powerful never goes wrong. She mentions that the monster spawners are called shifts, and was part of her project to find and control the grimoire. She sends out her secret weapon meant to neutralize the grimoire, a railway-based tank, runs around dealing collision damage and firing off spells. Unfortunately, I go Metal Gear Rising on it and demonstrate that yes, a sword can totally beat a tank, and I kill it dead. Rune tries to talk Lynette out of doing evil stuff, but she runs away. He's determined not to kill a person, which is a little idealistic given the situation, but oh well, it's fiction. The Harvest Moon spin-off is not the game I expect to fall on the cynical side of things. And now that's done, I can use some monster materials from the back half of Den and Cave. Most significantly, I can now upgrade my fishing rod to level 4 and 5. Yes, I can only just do that now with one cave left. In fact, the third tier also requires the same material if I were to do it myself and not through Leo. This is actually not as bad as the hoe, which can only be upgraded to level 5 with a material in the final dungeon. Even though the hoe is the farming tool with the least recurring use, generally you till a square once and it stays that way, so upgrading it to till more squares is probably the least useful of all the farming tool upgrades. Yeah, look, you already have a very good idea of how weird the progression through forging is in this game. I'm just repeating myself at this point. But upgrading my fishing rod does help my forging a little, but at this point it's so high that tools don't actually do much for it. Yet I'm still a ways away from being able to craft the very highest level stuff, which, yeah, is kind of an issue, isn't it? Combined with the general lack of need to get anywhere near the maximum possible strength. My Chaos Blade had a skill requirement of 60, and it's one of the best weapons in the game. Meanwhile, the highest skill requirement for a weapon is the Gunganir with a requirement of 95 to guarantee success, which I think means around 85 to have the 1% chance that you can eventually brute force to it. And unlike decorations with its simple 2-item high-level recipes, there's no easy way to grind smithing because anything with a decent skill requirement that you can make is generally at the end of a long crafting chain. I mean, I made all of the component swords for the 4th element, one of the options for an ultimate 2-handed sword, but with its level 90 requirement, it doesn't seem like I'll get it, and I don't. I'm at 74 right now, so I still need several more levels to even have a 1% chance, and it's totally unnecessary, never mind the fact that one-handed swords are still the better weapon type in this game. I just want to have it, and because I've tried to entertain the idea of using 2-handed swords. At least until I got over-leveled, at which point I didn't really have much use for the extra attack and could just bulldoze everything with one-handed swords just as easily. But going through town, everyone acts like Raguna has solved everything, but he's not convinced. He talks with the mayor and gets a pass for the last cave. No bullshit asked. And the last area is Greed Cave, a beautiful area lined with crystals, and a fairly fitting final dungeon. There's several materials here that can only be found here, and thus several items that can only be crafted at this point, including the Rune Blade, the other candidate for the strongest one-handed sword, and a prior weapon in that upgrade tree, and as mentioned, the tier 5 hoe. Again, again, it's weird that the hoe is the last tool you get to max out. Maybe they were going for something sort of symbolic with how it's probably what you use to fight your very first monster, but from a mechanical point of view, it's kind of pointless. And then Greed Cave doesn't have too many gimmicks, but it introduces something we haven't seen in a long time. Enemies that can actually hurt me outside of magic damage. So that's kind of refreshing. I actually have to put in a bit of effort here and actually play the game. It's not a long cave though, and I'm already mostly maxed out. So after I get used to enemies that can actually hurt me, I kind of just power through. It's kind of neat that there's a lot of stairways here, giving you the sense that you're descending deep into the earth. But again, it's not that long. It's only a moderate amount of difficulty, and there's no stalling elements like the last two caves had. I feel like maybe the intent was for it to be a short but brutal level, since the enemies are a threat even to my level 99 self, so I can imagine a lot of players had a bit of difficulty with this if they were not as well geared. But since I am as over geared as I am, it's more just a short and non-trivial level. I reach the bottom of the cave with a strange machine with pipes leading to it. I step onto the sigil in the middle and go forth. I find Lynette standing around with some computers. The sets really are advanced, huh? After pressing some buttons that use the same sound effects as the in-game menu, she summons the true grimoire, a horned dragon. Or rather, she summons the earth dragon god Terrible, revealing that grimoire was its name before it became a god. There are 4 elemental dragons that are mentioned in a book in the library. This is the only one related to this game. She reveals that they had been in Greed Cave for years, and then reveals her plan, that only a chosen Earthmate can rouse the grimoire. Earthmates have come up before. I just haven't mentioned them. They aren't well defined, but Raguna is apparently one. Specifically, he is this chosen Earthmate. They planned for Raguna to do his thing, destroying the shifts, battling monsters, cultivating dungeons, while siphoning off rune energy to fuel the grimoire's awakening. They even reveal that they're the ones who erased his memory to set this whole thing up. Even him destroying their tank was part of their plan. Raguna asks who he was, but there's no time for talking. Only fighting. And the grimoire is a pretty easy fight. I mean, it can actually hurt me and takes like a modest amount of effort to kill, but actually feels less threatening than many of the monsters in the cave leading up to it. And I still have a top tier weapon with maxed out strength. After the plan fails, Lynette's boss shows up. The Emperor, in fact. Naturally, being evil, he expects her to take her own life for failing, and she's oddly willing to do that. Guess she's a true believer in whatever the government of the Sech Empire tells its people to believe, I don't know. They're not really given much detail beyond evil, high-tech imperialists. But Raguna suggests that she just live in the town she just tried to destroy. Okay, this is getting a little too idealistic to believe, even fully going along with the game's tone. At least he does genuinely seem to do it out of a desire for peace and to see no one get hurt unnecessarily, and is probably mostly motivated by the alternative being a death sentence. So even if it's idealistic, it's not just purely being naive, I guess. Unfortunately, the Sech Empire does have a plan B with a tank division rolling in. The Emperor asks if my skill can stop over 100 tanks, and yeah, I mean, probably. But we go back and try to evacuate the town. Well, that was a sudden transition. The game suddenly skipped to midday the following day, so I had to switch weeks. Anyway, we're warning the town. After talking with the mayor, Ivan says I should go to the Sech border to try to hold them off. So I go to the southwest corner of the map, past Misty Bloom Cave, a zone that's always been there by the by, and prepare to face them. These tanks look smaller and cheaper than the big one at the end of Danon Cave, even if I was intended to beat that one, so I could probably win. But it's still treated as hopeless, with Raguna only able to buy time. Ivan, ever mysterious, also offers his aid, and we prepare for a desperate fight to save the town. But before we can fight, there's an earthquake and a shadow overhead. It's the dragon god Terrible, free of Sech control and having evolved from the grimoire. We don't get to see it directly though, instead just seeing its shadow as it flies overhead and breathes a green fog that causes plants to grow and stop the tanks. And now, without the tanks, there's really no way for the Sech Empire to beat Raguna. And everyone knows this. Raguna threatens them with a cool one-liner, and the Sech soldiers are stuck walking back. Raguna claims afterwards that he probably couldn't have fought them off, but really, he probably could. Have you seen the boss fights in this game? They also spell out the vague technology versus nature theme by outright saying it was nature's power that defeated the invading army. But then everyone, and I do mean everyone, shows up to congratulate Raguna, and Ivan wanders off and makes a cryptic remark. Before we get a cutscene with him talking with the King of Norad, if I'm reading between the clumsy translation properly, Ivan here is actually the prince of the country we're in, and Raguna is his long-lost brother. Man, these are sure some out-of-nowhere twists that really don't affect the plot in any way, huh? Like, why does it matter if Raguna is the prince of this country? And then they spell out the live in harmony with the earth rather than ruling with machines message. Again, at least here it's a little better phrased rather than just nature versus technology. And then the credits roll. Hilariously starting with the scene of Raguna tilling his fields even though it's still winter and that's impossible. And then I'm dropped back in my house another full day later. And so, on Monday the 20th of winter, the game ends and the rest of Raguna's life begins. Wait, Monday the 20th? Shit. You know how the 19th got eaten up entirely by the endgame event? The 19th is Sharon's birthday. I missed my wife's birthday because I was busy dealing with a fucking military invasion. Damn, isn't that a hilarious and entirely unintended note to end on? Well, at least not having the town she lives in razed to the ground makes for a pretty good birthday present, right? And that's Rune Factory, a fantasy harvest moon. Or a fantasy story of seasons, as it should probably be called today, and would definitely be called if it got a remake. There's other stuff I could do. I could farm Greed Caves monsters for some last upgrades. I could grind up my smithing for some of the best weapons. I can buy and grow rare seeds with stupidly long growth times that the general store now sells. I can do the remaining winter festivals and play through the next year to do the festivals I couldn't participate in or failed at. I could befriend Lynette, who now lives with Mist. She's even eligible to marry if you aren't already married at this point. Actually, I intended to do this when I first played the game back in the day, but it's such a time sink after you've already exhausted most of the game's content, so I never did it. And as the very last long-term goal, if you play long enough after getting married, you'll have a kid. And maybe I'll do some of it. Probably not, but maybe. But the thing is, there's no real post-game, no bonus dungeon or super boss. And this video is already stupidly long. I don't need to pad it out with even more weeks that are just even barer than the summer and fall sections. So it's as I said. Winter 20th is where the game ends, and Raguna's life begins. So, with everything all wrapped up, let's talk about the game and, frankly, the big things holding it back. Rune Factory 1 is a pretty great game, and it will always have a special place in my heart. Unfortunately, it does have a few big issues that make it feel rough around the edges and make it pretty hard for me to recommend. For one, the Harvest Moon side of the game, half of this whole fusion concept, is greatly underbaked compared to even other contemporary Harvest Moon titles. One of the biggest reasons for this is just how drastic the item level system is. Because of how much it can be worth to have just a small handful of high-level crops or some good luck with high-level gems, money quickly becomes a non-factor, and playing normal Harvest Moon is a rather inefficient way to play. At the same time, it's weird that it doesn't get used for some things like animal products. But regardless, the fact that I wound up with all the money I could ever need by the end of week 1 of summer, about a quarter of the way through the game, actually maybe more like a third, but still only a fraction of the way into the game, It meant that I had basically won the Harvest Moon side of things. And really, this just happened because I made the level 3 hammer, something basically everyone is going to get around to. Sure, the strawberries helped, but the hammer was just as much, if not more, for far less effort. So the economy just breaks itself, and again, the sheer profit of mining just renders farming obsolete unless you're really aggressively abusing things like I did with strawberries. And even then, I ran out of things to buy before the strawberry thing was in full swing. The game just doesn't really have that many money sinks after you upgrade your house. I mean, okay, maybe the books could have served that purpose, but it's still trivial compared to both the house cost and especially how much money you can make by abusing the level system. Plus, most of the books are for cooking, which is easily the least useful form of crafting. You know, honestly, the fact that the upgraded hammer is what breaks the economy so badly makes me honestly think it's possible to just ignore the farm sim elements, play this game as basically a pure action RPG, and only grow crops when it's necessary. Also, while I admittedly don't remember the social sim elements in the contemporary Harvest Moon games I played being that deep or anything, I do feel like Rune Factory needs a bit more character development and unique conversations. The only ones that really jump out at me was Tabitha revealing that she's an elf, and the conversation I got the same day where Cecilia is alluded to being a half-elf. The fact that I managed to miss any such events with my chosen bachelorette in particular made that aspect of the game feel particularly shallow. Maybe there are more events and I just failed to trigger most of them. I know there's a couple side quests that I've read about for certain bachelorettes, but that's kind of it as far as I know. I mean, ultimately I was pretty regular about talking to everyone and barely got any, so many of them might be quite well hidden, or admittedly maybe I just needed to talk to people in their rooms more, but then again, it's not like that got me any special events with Sharon. I feel like keeping any character events this well hidden is definitely to the game's detriment, or maybe I just screwed up really badly, but again, I was pretty regular about talking with everyone, so yeah. And it's not just the farming sim side. There are some pretty significant issues with the dungeon crawling too. The way rune points never increase make them rather useless. You will run through them in a day very quickly and spend most of the day using your hit points as stamina instead. And the fact that this is such an issue makes magic rather hard to make use of as well. It's telling that the best way to use them is probably just to restore your hit points. Then there's the item balancing, which can make crafting a pain, where often the effort you put in is not relative to the reward you get, and the fact that you're basically crafting blind all the time is just making it worse. Heck, at least with weapons and accessories, they tell you what they do after you've crafted them, and the balancing is further undermined just by the sheer supremacy of one-handed swords. Then there are the issues with how all combat outside of bosses and I guess that one scripted encounter with the mini golem in Casimir are based around monster spawners. While these spawners do make farming for materials mercifully easy, they tend to make the game a little bit simpler. There's basically never any proper encounters that are designed and use multiple enemy types to create an interesting challenge. Just isolated spawners that spawn one or two monsters of a uniform type, and because you can easily hit both the monster and spawner in the same swing, usually this means that each spawner just equates to one or two monsters. Because the monsters are tethered within a short range of the spawner, it's not like you have to worry about a spawner continuously being a threat until you take it out, or monsters wandering over to you. You could honestly just replace the monster spawners with one or two fixed spawns of the monster that they spawn, and the game wouldn't really change at all. As a result, the dungeon crawling is a bit primitive. But hey, again, at least the monster spawners make farming easy. Then there's just the fact that the game feels a bit too focused on just the main story. There's little side content, and there's the aforementioned issue where money stops having any value with the house upgrade, and it also ends up worsening other issues, like Misty Bloom Cave. It feels like it exists mostly to stall out the game to ensure you take, at minimum, most of a year to complete the game, but there's plenty of potential for it to end up like it did for me, where I just have way too long to wait, and there's, again, not really much side content to do in that time other than just grinding and farming. Because the focus of this game is so much on completing the main story, this delay and the potential to get quite overgeared during it is a much bigger issue than it would be in a game that gave you more to do to actually just live the slow Harvest Moon life. Not to mention there's the complete lack of any substantial post-game, certainly any real post-game that's focused on the combat stuff. Sure, there's a few things to do, but there's no challenge dungeon or bonus boss or something, which really sucks because, yeah, I was pretty strong, but probably could have gotten stronger if I put in the effort, and I was only modestly challenged by the final dungeon, but I really enjoyed the final dungeon for at least being a little bit of a challenge again. I want something in this game that drives me to really dig deep into the systems and get all I can out of them. Also, I do feel the need to emphasize that these are still farming sim games. Not a problem for me, and I mean it is kind of the whole concept of the series, but if you go in expecting a full-on, straight-up action RPG, you'll probably be disappointed. It is still paced like a Harvest Moon game, at least when things are working as intended. Again, this isn't necessarily a flaw, but I'm sure this will turn some people off. Think of it as a Harvest Moon or a Story of Seasons game where dungeon crawling happens to be one of the activities you can spend your day on. Not like a Diablo or a Phantasy Star Online style dungeon crawler that happens to include farming. If you come in expecting the latter, you'll be disappointed. This is a game about taking your time and living a year in this village that just so happens to be in a fantasy world where fighting monsters is a thing you can do. As an action RPG, it may come off as slow and grindy, but that's just part of the immersion of playing a farming sim game. You take your time and work towards your goals. Fuck, maybe that explains some things about me as a person and my taste in the genre. Is Rune Factory the reason I have the patience of a saint for grinding so long as it's well contextualized? I mean, I played Monster Hunter DOS and loved it even when I was farming Machilite ore, 12 of them, at a rate of typically 1 per quest, and then farming even more for the next weapon upgrade. Shit, I think it might be. Actually, maybe this explains a lot about my taste in action RPGs. I mean, I prefer enjoying the journey to rushing to the end and farming endgame because, well, Rune Factory is a single-player focused game and there's not really any sort of post-game or endgame to speak of. It is all about the journey. There's the fact I like to feel engaged with the world instead of just cold hard mechanics. Rune Factory is built upon the Life Sim Harvest Moon series, so of course the game places an emphasis on living day to day in this world. It's kind of left me with a desire for games like this where I feel like I could live in the world that's gone mostly unfulfilled. There aren't many RPG type games that scratch that itch outside of MMORPGs, and even then mostly the more old school sandboxy types of MMORPGs. Continuing on, there's the way I tend to prefer bespoke weapons that are designed by the developers and can serve as goals and be a notable part of your adventure rather than just having piles of randomly generated leveled loot that exists to be continuously replaced. I mean, this game does exactly what I said I preferred and focuses mostly on forging your own weapons, so of course you'll get attached to them, especially after the effort it takes to get them. Yeah, I think so much of my taste in action RPGs were shaped by this little game. It's weird how this game that I mostly had barely thought of since I stopped playing the series after the third title has shaped my taste in games. So yeah, if you ever are watching another of my videos and think, that is a weird, confusing taste and I genuinely don't understand where Mikhail is coming from at all, blame it on this game. Honestly, that means this is probably one of the most important games to me I played growing up. Heck, it arguably even shaped my taste in like art styles for anime and anime style stuff. Don't get me wrong, it's still definitely anime-esque, but there are things like the more subdued color palette, the greater sense of texture, and the slightly rough and sketchy style end up making it feel a fair bit more grounded than I typically associate with an anime style. I guess to put it another way, it feels like an anime interpretation of more typical fantasy fare, rather than what you might think of, especially these days, as anime set in a fantasy setting. It has a lot more in common with the classic anime, especially fantasy anime of like the 80s and 90s. So with all that said, should you play it? Honestly, probably not. I do love this game, and it has its strong points over its sequels, like having more in-depth equipment stats and a full 8 dungeons. But the fact I spent most of summer just level grinding and couldn't do much in fall except crafting, yeah, that dragged the game down a bit. Although, I mean, it was at least partly my fault. Plus, getting so over-leveled and breezing through the back half of the game made the later dungeons kind of dull as well. But during the first month of the game, when everything was working right, goddamn, I was having a good time. And hey, maybe if you play it, you won't end up in the same awkward situation as I did. I know I didn't have quite such an extreme outcome when I originally played it. And hey, the game was good enough to have such a big impact on my tastes. I guess it's in that inconclusive range that always makes for such an unsatisfying review. It's neither super amazing nor significantly bad. It's just fine, good. I had a fair bit of fun with it, but there's also enough wrong with it that I can see all the reasons why someone wouldn't. And I'm someone who tends to be a lot more patient than most when it comes to these kinds of things. It's good and a solid start to the series, and most of its flaws will be addressed in the sequels, but it's still unique and good enough to stand on its own. I don't know, if you're already a fan of these games, it's certainly worth going back to play for its first game quirks and just to have another Rune Factory game to play. And I certainly did enjoy replaying it for this video, but I don't think this is the place to start if you want to get into Rune Factory or even just the DS era of Rune Factory. I mean, I guess that's good enough, right? There's a lot to be debated about how a game's historical context affects how the game is discussed and reviewed, but I mean, in a way, Rune Factory 1 did what it needed to do. It was a solid enough foundation and a good enough game to justify some sequels that took its ideas and really made something special out of them. As I said, the sequels do a lot to build on the game. In fact, it's one of those series where within a game or two, there's such a quantum leap forward that it's almost unrecognizable as the same game. But that's for another time. But there will be another time. I was already planning on making this whole franchise retrospective, or at very least a retrospective on the trilogy of titles for the DS, because those are the ones that I played at the time. And the fact that I had such a good time replaying this game for this video, yeah, I have to play the sequels now. So that's a wrap. Before I do my sign-off, I do want to mention that, well, this video is already a bit late, and I'm probably not going to have any videos in the next 2 months. I had some tentative plans, but aside from already being kind of behind on those, I'm moving in a couple of weeks, so I just will not have the time or setup to work on the upcoming videos. I should be back in October at the latest, though. I have a big plan for November. I've sort of decided what my new holiday thing is going to be this year. And then there is one more game I really want to cover before the end of the year, namely another installment in the ongoing series that is both my personal favorite to make and home to some of the most successful videos on this channel. So yeah, I'll be gone for a little bit, but hopefully I will end the year with a nice couple of videos. But for now, this is Mikhail, signing off.